Welcome back! Next in this series of cosplay videos, I'll show you how I made my shoe covers for Ryme from Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. I picked up a pair of cheap sneakers from City Trends and began to build my pattern with the usual tape and plastic method. Instead of plastic wrap or press and seal, I prefer to reuse my shopping bags. I also like using painter's tape and masking tape for patterns as they don't leave a residue and are easy to remove. I wrapped the entire shoe first to get a general idea of how big I'd like it to be, and then make markings on it. The shoe base will be 3 pieces, the side, the middle, and then the inner side of the foot. I also make a curved marking for the toe of the foot since that is the most curved. Once that is done, I cut out the shoe pieces and set them aside. It's only necessary to make one pattern, as you can flip the pieces over to make the opposite foot. I then taped just the toes for the next pattern piece, as Ryme has some pretty gnarly fangs on the toes of her shoes. Based on the reference photos that I printed from the game, I would glance at it and make my sketches. Next, it's time to make the next set of pattern pieces. Ryme shoes have an interesting cover with 6 slots on top, so I wrapped the shoe in plastic, taped it again to work on that section. I did have to make a few adjustments to this section as I didn't want it to be too long. You'll see later in the video when I transfer this portion of the pattern to paper. Last, with some spare paper, I sketched out the tongue of the shoe and then the sides that cover it. In hindsight, I would have made these a little taller as they weren't very proportionate, and I happen to have large feet, so small details look unnecessarily small. But it still worked out. I will mention that though I bought these sneakers, the assembled shoe covers wouldn't fit on top of them, so I wound up wearing slides instead. Now that all of the pattern pieces are established, it's time to transfer them to foam. The foam work was probably a huge portion of where my time was spent on these shoes. Working time was around 12 to 15 hours over the course of a week while working on other portions of Ryme's costume. I also did not buy any new foam for this and was able to utilize leftover foam scraps. It was all 5mm foam for the main base, 6 or 8mm foam for the tongue and side portions, and 10mm foam for the fangs. As mentioned earlier, I did have to mirror the shoe base pattern to account for the opposite foot. And for the top shoe cover, I did transfer that to paper to make it a little more symmetrical in appearance. You'll often see the most random things being used as weights in my video, and it's because I will use whatever I have nearby to weigh something down. Strawberry soda was actually very effective for this. When cutting out the shoe base pieces, I lined them up with one another and marked connection points. If you're working with curved portions of foam, marking your connection points is crucial to ensure that it's assembled properly, that the ends are flush and not uneven, as well as eliminating gaps and retaining the shape you desire. Moving forward, I also gear up with my respirator mask, break out the Dremel, and begin to round out the edges for the shoe tongue, the fangs, and the slotted top cover. This gives them a smoother appearance and makes things look neater overall. The fangs required the most shaping as I wanted to bring the taller teeth to sharp appearing points. Also, I used just the regular Dremel attachment for this at the second to lowest speed. I typically would do my Dremel work outside since foam dust gets everywhere, but because these pieces were so small, the dust was relegated to my cutting board. After this, I did use my heat gun to heat seal, shape, and curve everything, but I opted not to film that portion for the sake of memory and space. Filming in 60 frames per second takes a lot of gigabytes. Next up, it's time to start gluing things together. Foam is naturally very porous, so heat sealing it prior to gluing helps to prevent the contact cement from being absorbed into the material. I like DAP weldwood for my contact cement, but I also will have super glue and hot glue on hand for the high tension areas. Somewhere out there, I have silicone brushes to use for the contact cement instead of foam scraps, but I think I had them put up with my resin materials. The gluing process takes time, as you have to apply the glue to both sides of what you want to be bonded, then wait for it to get tacky, and then press the sides together. The time to wait before bonding can be as little as 2 minutes or as long as 15 minutes. The key is to ensure that the glue looks dry and isn't wet to the touch before you make the bond. It's a lot of sitting and waiting and keeping track of what's what and what needs glue. I also use some masking tape to hold some pieces together after the bond to make sure that it dries intact and connected well. Before moving on to the detailed portions of the shoe cover, I wrapped them around the sneakers to test the fit and appearance. I did wind up trimming some of the foam off in the back where it would connect. As mentioned, the sneakers were a really great idea, but the execution wasn't what I wanted, and I had to switch to my slides. It made walking around the convention pretty comfortable though. Watching the shoe covers come together is really satisfying, as this is the first time I've done full shoe covers with foam. I've made fabric shoe covers before with no problem, but the first pair of shoe covers I made with foam kept falling apart at the convention. Naturally, this was many years ago when I knew much less than I do now. For the high tension portions around the ankle, I used all 3 types of glue: contact cement, super glue, and hot glue. It might seem overkill, but again, on that one attempt at a foam shoe cover that I made in the past, it kept falling apart. I wanted to make sure that the pieces wouldn't fall off as I walked. It made walking a little interesting since the shoe covers are large and I have big feet, but the construction has held up since first making them. Moving forward, I measured 6 pieces of elastic to serve as straps to put on the bottom of the shoe covers. I used contact cement and super glue to bond the elastic to the foam, but also reinforced it with staples from my staple gun. I had a spare pool noodle to absorb the impact and receive the spikes of the staple, and used needle nose pliers to bend them in place. I first discovered this method when I made my bracers for Cami back in 2022. Like I said before, I know it's overkill, but I won't ever have foam shoe covers fall apart again. Almost done! Now that the shoe covers are assembled, it's time to prep for paint. Thank you again to Plastidip for sending me such wonderful supplies. I use them with every foam project that I make. I used about 3 coats of Plastidip total. The painting was the most delightful part of the shoe covers. I used Rust-Oleum's Bright Coat Metallic Gold paint, but I sprayed in bursts rather than steady waves to build up the color gradually and still allow some of the black from the Plastidip to show through. I like this method so that I don't have to do as much weathering and detail work, though you will still see some of that in the final shot. I did paint small zippers so that the shoe covers could come off and on, but the glue dried against the zipper teeth, meaning I couldn't open them all the way, which is why I couldn't get the sneakers to fit. The final details are actually Angela's shoe paint, since it's the most opaque black paint that I have. I use a small detail brush for this to add additional lines on the side pieces of the shoe, fill in the slots on the slotted covers, and add a little shading detail to the fangs. Off camera, I also added some small black sections on the side of each shoe to try to give it the appearance of the heels that Ryme has. I also sealed everything with 5 coats of satin Mod Podge. I have found that I do want to just get a pair of heeled boots and add the foam pieces to them to serve as Ryme shoes in the future. But for now, I'm still very satisfied with how they came out, as they were one of the most popular pieces of the cosplay. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more videos on how I created other components of Ryme's cosplay.